I was 52 years old when I arrived in the empty quarter, and I remember thinking the desert would finally swallow me whole. That was the point. I wasn't running, not exactly. I just wanted the noise to stop, the slow, scraping noise of memory, the kind that echoes even in silence. My name is Dr. Samuel Kent. I was once a trauma surgeon. I've pulled bullets from boys who thought they were men and sewn up mothers whose screams could bend glass. I worked in Beirut. I worked in Fallujah. Before that, I worked in New York City's trauma ward where the lights never go off and the blood never quite dries. But nothing prepared me for the desert. The Red Crescent's offer had come like a whisper. An old friend who remembered I still had my license and that I didn't ask questions. The mission was small. Provide medical assistance to isolated nomadic communities in the southern Arabian Peninsula. Simple work. Clean work. No politics, no press. Just heat, time, and sand. I welcomed the simplicity. The desert is not silent, by the way. Not really. It breathes. Pulses. At night it sighs and shivers beneath your feet. Wind dances over dunes like fingers through skin. The stars feel so close you could burn your tongue on them if you whispered the wrong prayer. And everything, the rocks, the trees, the very air, feels older than it should be. Like it remembers things men forgot long ago. The camp was sparse. A tent, a cot, a metal trunk for supplies. Camels coughed in the distance. My interpreter, Salim, was polite and young and always looking at the horizon, as though something were meant to rise from it. "You will not find what you are looking for," he told me one night, unprompted. I looked up from my journal, blank pages mostly, or notes on waterborne infections, and asked, "What do you think I'm looking for?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, not unkindly, and returned to boiling tea. It was 3 weeks in when the storm came. A proper desert storm is not cinematic. It doesn't roar in like a lion. It builds, low and slow, the wind curling around itself like a snake testing your boundaries. The sky turns the color of an old bruise. Then comes the sound, static, deep, vibrating through bone. And then the sand. You cannot breathe it. You cannot outrun it. You hunker down and hope the earth remembers you kindly. When the storm broke, I stayed curled under my blanket, eyes stinging, waiting for the rage to pass. Hours later, silence returned, but different, like something had shifted. Salim was gone. Instead, a shape stood at the edge of the tent, dark robes, silent presence. I remember blinking through grit and realizing there were more behind her, standing still as stones. "Doctor," she said. Her voice was low, shaped by accent and old breath. "Come." I followed. I should have been afraid. Strangers in the desert. No name, no warning, but the pull was like gravity, soft and insistent. They led me through narrow paths between dunes I hadn't noticed before, until we reached a cluster of tents, round, sun-bleached, decorated with hanging beads and clay charms. Fires glowed low in carved lanterns. It looked ceremonial, sacred even. The first woman I truly saw stood before me at the center of a wide circle drawn in ash and salt. She wore a long indigo cloak, her face mostly covered, but her eyes were green like wet stone. Tired, watchful, patient. "Ahlam," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. "Samuel," I replied. She nodded and beckoned me forward, gesturing toward a wooden stool beside a pile of hand-woven mats and old leather scrolls. Another woman, younger, knelt beside a bowl of steaming herbs. A third poured oil into a dish and crushed petals with her fingertips. They moved without urgency, not rushed, not theatrical, as if I had always been expected. Ullum reached for my hands. I flinched. Reflex, nothing more. She paused, letting me adjust. Then gently, deliberately, she turned my palms upward and examined the cracked skin, sunburned and dried from weeks under the desert sky. Her fingers traced the webbing between my thumb and index, a gesture both medical and maternal. Then she dipped a cloth into the oil and began to rub. I hadn't been touched like that in years. Not clinically, not professionally, but with presence. There was no flirtation in it, no heat of seduction. It was something slower, sadder, a kind of recognition, Two people who had spent too long inside themselves. She said something to the others. They moved with intention, one wrapping my wrist in soft cotton, another placing a bowl of dates and honey at my feet. A flute played softly outside. Children's laughter echoed in the distance. I wasn't sure if I was being honored, tested, or mourned. Later, they brought me to a tent layered with cushions and shadow. The smell of jasmine and saffron hung in the air. The wind fluttered the fabric walls gently, like breath over skin. Ahlam sat across from me. Between us, a lamp flickered. "You heal people," she said. "I try," I replied. "You are not healed." I smiled dryly. "That obvious?" She didn't smile back. She reached for a clay pot and poured hot tea into 2 small cups. I took mine and let the steam warm my face. "Your pain," she said. "It does not stay in America." My throat tightened. I hadn't spoken of my wife since she died. Not even to myself. Ahlam didn't press, didn't ask. She simply sat, her presence filling the space without force. We didn't speak more that night. Instead, we shared silence. The kind that only strangers can share when they recognize something broken in each other. A kind of peace, taut and thin like the breath before sleep. When she rose, she paused by the entrance. "You stay," she said, not as a question. And I did. They came to me in dreams first. Not all at once. A face here, a gesture there. A brush of fingers over my brow, cool and featherlight. A whisper of cloth trailing across my chest as I lay half asleep beneath a woven canopy that smelled of ash and lavender. The desert had a rhythm, and somehow I had begun to dream in it. But they were not dreams. Not entirely. Each morning after the storm, I woke in their camp. Still a guest, though the word felt clumsy for what I was becoming. They never used it. They didn't label things the way Westerners do. You were there or not. You were seen or not. There were no walls. Just proximity, trust, silence. The tent they had given me opened toward the east. At dawn, the horizon blushed gently, like breath warming the curve of a shoulder. Ahlam often brought me tea before I could rise, her silhouette framed against the morning light. "No sugar today," she would say, or, "Too much sleeping. Your spirit is lazy." She teased me more now. It made her smile, and I found myself chasing that smile like an old man chasing sunlight in winter. It was on the 7th morning when they invited me to the circle. I was led by 2 girls, no older than 20. Their names were Layla and Noura, and they barely spoke to me. But they laughed often, at birds, at each other, sometimes even at me. They seemed light in a place that carried centuries. The circle was set just beyond the last row of tents, where the sands shifted less and the wind hummed low. Stones formed its perimeter, each painted with natural dyes, ochre, rust, deep blues from indigo. At the center, a bowl of smoking myrrh sat beside a single curved blade. Not threatening, ceremonial, like something forged for dance, not war. 24 women stood waiting, each veiled, robed in various shades of gold, red, and dark green. Each carried something, an object, a symbol. I noticed them in flashes. One held a sprig of dried rosemary. Another, a folded cloth stained with ink. One bore a cracked mirror. Another, a shell. Another, simply a bowl of salt. I stood at the edge of the circle, unsure, until Ahlam stepped forward. She touched my elbow softly, permission, not command, and guided me to sit on a cushion just outside the ring. Then she spoke, not to me, but to the gathered women. Her words flowed like water from an unseen spring. I caught fragments in Arabic: witness, quiet, exchange, lineage. Salim had once tried to teach me dialect, but these words were old, different, like dusted bones pulled from beneath sand and given new life. Then the first woman stepped forward. She knelt before me and removed her veil. Her name was Sahar. Her eyes were dark, almost violet in the light. Without speaking, she offered me the sprig of rosemary and pressed it to my temple. The scent hit something buried in me. Kitchen tables, laughter, a scarf my wife once wore during winter. She leaned forward, resting her forehead to mine for a breath. Then she left. The next came. Her name was Mina. She placed the ink-stained cloth in my hand and guided my fingers over the marks, as if reading Braille. I didn't understand, but something in my chest loosened, as though meaning wasn't in comprehension, but surrender. One by one they came. Sulwa taught me how to hold silence. Not the awkward Western kind, but a purposeful stillness. Zainab took my pulse with both hands and closed her eyes, her breath syncing with mine. Huda placed a cool stone in my palm, then took my other hand and guided it across her own collarbone. Inviting, not seductive. An anatomy of connection. They were not seducing me, not in the way I once knew seduction. This was something quieter, stranger, more reverent. Each woman gave and received something. Sometimes a glance, sometimes a shared breath. Once, it was a song whispered into the curve of my ear, barely audible. Another time, it was simply a shared cup of bitter coffee, our fingers brushing around the handle. I never learned all their names, not at once. But I remembered their hands, their scents, the way they moved or how their heads tilted when listening. Details like brushstrokes, pieces of a mosaic I had no right to understand, yet was becoming a part of. At twilight, the ceremony ended. Ahlam knelt beside me, her face bare now. The lines near her mouth had deepened. She looked tired, but not in a fragile way. In a knowing way. "They see you," she said. I didn't respond. I was still absorbing. She placed her hand over my chest. "Do you?" I didn't answer then either. That night, I returned to my tent alone, but I couldn't sleep. The desert air was cooler, the stars closer. I sat cross-legged on the mat, trying to write. The journal remained mostly blank. I had scribbled down Sahar's name, then crossed it out, then wrote it again. What was I supposed to call them? Healers? Priestesses? Daughters of the tribe? Lovers? No, that word didn't fit. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I was changing. That much I knew. My hands no longer trembled when I poured tea. My dreams were no longer gray. I stopped hearing the beeping of heart monitors in the back of my head, the ghostly hum of hospitals. Instead, I heard laughter at dawn, oil bubbling over fire, a woman humming to herself as she ground spices before the sun rose. They had made room for me not by inviting but by being. I didn't know what they wanted, or if they wanted anything at all, but I had started watching how they moved, how they shared water from the same tin cup, how they draped an extra shawl over a child without comment, how they looked at the moon before sleeping, as if in silent prayer. And I had begun to do the same. Late one night, Ahlam came to sit outside my tent. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, I asked, "Is this a test?" She shook her head. "No test. A mirror." "A mirror for what?" Her eyes glinted in the firelight. "Your emptiness. Your beginning." She touched my hand again. Not a caress, just contact, a human truth. Then she stood and left me with the wind. There's a silence in the desert that doesn't ask anything of you. Simply waits. No demand. No judgment. Just presence. But eventually, every silence turns into a question. By the third week in the tribe's company, I had begun to forget the passing of time. I moved between tents without thinking. Shared meals of flatbread and date paste, helped wrap wounds and stir herbs. The women no longer looked at me as a guest, nor did I feel like one. I had somehow become a part of their rhythm. But the question was coming. It arrived one night beneath a heavy moon, in the quiet way most truths do. Couldn't sleep. A breeze rustled the prayer cloths hanging from the nearby palms. Lanterns flickered low along the tent rows, their oil nearly spent. I stepped outside barefoot, letting the cold sand pinch at my soles. I'd grown to like that feeling, pain that reminded you were still inside your body. That's when I heard them speaking. Not loudly, but clear. Ahlam's voice, another woman's, older, raspier. They spoke in the old tongue, slow and ceremonial. My Arabic wasn't strong, but I knew enough now to catch pieces. His blood. The line. He does not yet know. I should have turned away, walked back inside. But something in me held still, the way one holds breath at the edge of a cliff. They were speaking of me. Later, I confronted Ahlam, gently, without accusation. We sat near the fire as the others prepared for the evening's prayer dance. I heard you, I said. Her face didn't change, but her hands stilled in the act of threading a blue sash through her dress. You speak of my blood, I continued. Why? She looked at me then, not as a lover or healer but as something older. A gatekeeper, a bearer of difficult truths. Our people are not as others, she said. I waited. We are what remains, she continued. A fragment of a forgotten order. We carry stories in our bones. Not just words but memory. Not just children but continuity. She placed a hand lightly over her own abdomen. We do not marry like your people. We do not divide love into pairs. We bind by lineage, not law. By sacred agreement. We do not seek romance. We seek balance. I said nothing. You are balance, she said. Unaware, unwilling, yes, but chosen. A long silence followed. I watched her profile against the glow of the fire. There was no triumph in her voice. No seduction. Just tired reverence. You think I was sent here? I finally said. No, she said. We did not send. We remembered. The words hit like dust against an open wound. Soft, but impossible to ignore. I left the fire without speaking again. I needed solitude. The next day I wandered the dunes alone. No guide, no purpose, just distance. I needed to hear my own thoughts again, if they still existed. The desert didn't fight me. It welcomed the madness. I walked until the camp was only a memory behind me. Sat on a high dune and stared into the shapeless horizon. I must have sat there for hours, unmoving, letting the sun dry my tongue and the wind sting my eyes. And then I wept. I wept for things I didn't know I still carried. My wife, Margaret, who had passed 6 winters ago after a battle with bone cancer so cruel it hollowed me out. For the children who no longer called. For the years I spent sewing others back together while quietly unraveling myself. I remembered her last words. Don't die with me, Sam. But I had. Until now. Until these women with their eyes like ancient wells, who touched me without taking, who listened without fixing, who demanded nothing, yet saw everything. When I returned to the camp, night had already fallen. Ahlam waited by my tent, kneeling on a folded blanket, her gaze soft but steady. You walked far, she said. I sat beside her, our shoulders nearly touching. I needed to forget myself. She tilted her head. And did you? No, I said, my voice hoarse. I think I found what was left. She nodded once, then leaned slightly, enough that her shoulder brushed mine. It was a simple contact, but it felt more intimate than anything I'd known in years. Later that night, the final rite was held. They called it Laylat al-Wasila, the night of the thread. I was dressed in a long indigo robe, given to me without explanation. The fabric smelled of ash and cedar. I followed the women to the sacred spring, a moonlit oasis encircled by low stones and silver sand. Lanterns floated on the water's surface, casting broken halos across our faces. Each of the 24 women formed a circle around me. They hummed not a song, but a vibration, a tone that began in the throat and sank into the earth. I felt it in my ribs. Ahlam stepped forward last, holding a length of red thread soaked in something fragrant. She tied it loosely around my wrist. We remember, she said, and now you remember with us. Then she pressed her forehead to mine. The others followed one by one. Each touched my wrist. Each offered a breath, a glance, a memory. One kissed my temple. Another laid her hand over my heart. Nothing overt, nothing carnal, but everything felt charged with a sacred kind of intimacy. No oaths were spoken, no contracts signed, only presence, only the warmth of 24 souls brushing against mine, like grains of sand carried by the same wind. That night, I lay beneath the open sky, alone but not. The air was cool, my body exhausted, but my spirit, if I still believed in such things, felt oddly whole. And just before I drifted into sleep, I heard Ahlam's voice whisper something beside me. They will come soon. I turned to ask what she meant, but she was already gone, her form vanishing into the dark like a shadow returning to its source. They found me wandering near a gas station 4 days' journey from the border. A lone American doctor, sunburned, dehydrated, and inexplicably calm. The soldier who spotted me said I looked like a ghost. I remember smiling at him and saying, "I think I've come back from something." He offered me water, his hands trembling as if I might shatter. I never told the authorities where I had been. How could I explain a place the world had forgotten? They took me to a hospital in Riyadh. I was examined, questioned, cleared, and released. No signs of trauma, no injuries, no explanation. A medical volunteer who had simply wandered too far, they said. The Red Crescent marked it down as an overexertion case. I didn't correct them. Back in the US, everything felt louder, more artificial. Doors shut too hard. Lights buzzed. People spoke quickly without looking at each other. It was as if I'd returned to a place that had no space for quiet. So I moved to a small desert town in New Mexico, a patch of land nobody wanted, with soil too dry for farming and winds too sharp for comfort. It reminded me, just enough, of where I had been. Not in form, but in feeling. I opened a clinic. Simple, modest, the kind with creaky floorboards, a waiting room filled with faded magazines, and a kettle always warm. Locals came with coughs, splinters, pregnancies, and heartaches. I treated all the same. I listened more than I prescribed. I wore the red thread ahlam tied on my wrist until it disintegrated. I never replaced it. Occasionally, at night, I would sit beneath the stars and listen. And sometimes, I swear this is true, I could hear the faint vibration of their hum, that sound from the spring, that resonance of something ancient moving just beneath the skin of the world. Years passed. One day I received a small package. No return address. Wrapped in worn linen. Sealed with a smudge of red clay. Inside, 24 painted stones, each with a different symbol. A carved wooden falcon, wings outstretched. A single folded note. No words. Only a print of a palm dipped in ochre. I held that package for a long time. Long enough for the tea on the stove to boil dry. Long enough for the sun to slip across the floorboards. They had found a way to say, "We remember." And I did too. I think of them often. Not in longing, but in presence. I remember Sahar, with her rosemary and sad eyes. Layla, who painted my fingernails with saffron and laughed at the way I squirmed. Zainab, who never spoke, but taught me to feel silence like a heartbeat. And Ahlam, of course. The first, the last, the thread through them all. I do not know what became of the tribe. I searched for them once, quietly. A few strings pulled, a few satellite images reviewed through an old acquaintance at the UN. Nothing. No record. No name. No camp. Like a mirage swallowed by shifting dunes. But I do not believe they vanished. They retreated. As they always had. As they always would. Back into the breath of the desert. Back into the folds of myth and sand. I began writing their story years after returning. Not for publication. Not for proof. But for memory. For anchoring. For the child who might one day find these pages and wonder. And yes, there was a child. She came to the clinic one afternoon, no warning. No appointment. No shoes. Just a girl, maybe 5 years old, dark hair, wide green eyes, and the kind of stillness that does not belong to children. She handed me a stone, painted blue with a spiral in the center. I looked outside. No car. No guardian. Just wind and horizon. When I looked back, she was gone. Some stories are not meant to be chased. That night, I dreamed of 24 lanterns floating on a desert spring. One by one, they blinked out until only the reflection of the stars remained. Years pass differently when you have no one to answer to. I keep the clinic. I tend a small garden. I sit in the shade during the hottest part of the day and let my memories bloom like date palms in forgotten soil. There's a shelf near my window where I keep the stones. The falcon watches over them. The ochre print has faded now, but sometimes, when the morning sun hits just right, I see the shape of her fingers again. I've been asked by the few who know me well why I never remarried. My answer is simple. Love, the kind that changes you, does not always come in twos. Sometimes, it arrives like a storm across the dunes, uninvited, unexplainable. It leaves you marked in ways no one else can see. And in its wake, there is not emptiness, but fullness. A fullness that does not seek possession, only presence. I found that, once, among 24 women and one sacred spring. And it was enough. This morning a child came to the clinic again. A boy this time, barefoot, silent, carrying a folded piece of cloth with a painted spiral. He looked up at me with calm eyes and asked, "Are you the doctor of the sand?" I smiled. "I was," I said. "A long time ago." He handed me the cloth and ran off into the wind. I didn't chase him. Instead, I sat beneath the old fig tree and held the cloth in my lap. I closed my eyes and breathed in. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent I hadn't smelled in decades. Jasmine, cedar, and a trace of salt. Somewhere I thought the circle still stands, and I, though far away, still belong to it. In the silence that followed, I could hear the sand remembering.